It was the moment no one saw coming. On a fiery segment on CNN, political commentator Jessica Tarlov launched a scathing critique against legendary actor and director Clint Eastwood, only to be met with a jaw-dropping response that instantly went viral. What started as a routine debate turned into a generational clash between Hollywood's old-school grit and modern media fire. And Clint? He didn't just defend himself. He silenced the room with a truth bomb about the film industry that left even Tarlov speechless. Let's break down exactly what happened in 5 explosive parts. It was supposed to be just another political roundtable on CNN, passionate, sure, but routine. The topic for the evening was already heating up the airwaves. Should Hollywood stay neutral or get political? Celebrities have been weighing in more than ever on major political issues, and both sides of the aisle were becoming increasingly divided on the question of influence, image, and responsibility in the entertainment industry. The host opened the floor to a mixed panel of voices: conservative commentators, liberal strategists, and entertainment journalists. Tensions simmered as the guests discussed everything from celebrity endorsements in elections to the social impact of blockbuster films. But just as the discussion began to find its rhythm, Jessica Tarlov, political strategist and frequent TV contributor, took the conversation in a sharply unexpected direction. And that's when things exploded. Studio microphone, Jessica Tarlov targets a Hollywood giant. In her signature sharp tone and with no hesitation, Tarlov pivoted away from the usual list of politically vocal celebrities and went straight for the jugular: Clint Eastwood. Now, it's one thing to criticize a tweet from a pop star. It's another thing entirely to go after a living legend, a man who spent 6 decades shaping American cinema and culture. But that didn't stop Tarlov. He's part of the problem, she declared, locking eyes with the camera. Clint Eastwood represents this outdated, macho, toxic version of America that Hollywood has worked hard to move past. The room froze. Tarlov doubled down, speaking over a few murmurs of disagreement from the other panelists. She continued, his films glorify a version of masculinity and morality that belongs in the past. They prop up traditional, out-of-touch conservative values. Values that no longer represent where America is or where it's going. You could hear the air get sucked out of the room. For a brief second, no one quite knew how to respond. This wasn't just a critique of a political opinion. It was a direct assault on Clint Eastwood's legacy. Television, he's a symbol of stagnation. Tarlov fires again. Jessica didn't stop there. She claimed Eastwood had become the face of old Hollywood's refusal to evolve. A relic of a time when studios were run by tough-talking men with rigid ideologies and narrow worldviews. He made a name for himself in a time when Hollywood rarely listened to women, minorities, or progressives. And instead of using his influence to help move things forward, he's clinging to the past. She listed films like Gran Torino, American Sniper, and A Mule, calling them coded messages that romanticize stoicism, gun culture, and unilateral justice. She labeled them dangerous nostalgia wrapped in Oscar-worthy packaging. One of the co-panelists, clearly uncomfortable, tried to pivot the conversation back to a safer topic. But Tarlov kept pressing, saying that if Hollywood didn't let go of figures like Eastwood, it would always be seen as elitist, male-dominated, and morally stuck in the past. Mobile phone social media ignites. Hashtag Eastwood versus Tarlov trends. As the show continued live, Twitter caught fire. Within minutes, clips of Tarlov's comments were being shared, dissected, and memed. Did she really just call Clint Eastwood toxic? Jessica Tarlov just picked a fight with Dirty Harry. Bold move. Calling Eastwood outdated is like calling Spielberg a TikTok director. What is she thinking? The backlash was immediate, but so was the support. On one side, Eastwood fans and classic film lovers were outraged, calling Tarlov's take insulting, ignorant, and disrespectful to cinema history. On the other side, progressives and younger activists applauded her for having the guts to challenge the sacred cows of Hollywood. Within the hour, the hashtag Eastwood versus Tarlov was trending. YouTubers began prepping reaction videos. Pundits across networks weighed in. It wasn't just a Hollywood moment anymore. It was a culture war flashpoint. Firecracker, the danger of dismissing a legend. It's important to understand what made Jessica Tarlov's attack so controversial. Clint Eastwood isn't just a director or an actor. He's a cultural institution. From his iconic role as the man with no name in Sergio Leone's spaghetti westerns to directing powerful films like $1 Million Baby and Mystic River, Eastwood has been a driving force behind some of the most impactful narratives in American film history. He's won multiple Academy Awards, directed over 40 films, and starred in dozens more. He's known for quiet, unflinching performances and gritty storytelling that examines morality, justice, and human complexity. Whether you agree with his politics or not, you can't deny his influence. And for many, Tarlov's criticism came off not as a fair critique, but as a generational disconnect, a disregard for decades of cinematic artistry. Fire a clash bigger than two people. What made this moment go viral wasn't just the names involved, it was what they represented. Jessica Tarlov, progressive millennial voice, often a lightning rod on Fox News, and a bold critic of traditional structures. Clint Eastwood, conservative-leaning icon, symbol of traditional American values, and a man who built his legacy on grit, silence, and story. This wasn't just a disagreement. It was a battle between ideologies, generations, and visions for what Hollywood should be. And everyone watching could feel it. Microphone, what happened next? While Clint Eastwood wasn't on the show himself, it didn't take long for him to respond. And his reply? Calm, direct, and absolutely devastating. He didn't need to raise his voice. He didn't need to trade insults. Instead, he hit back with something far more powerful, truth rooted in experience. But more on that in Section 2. The atmosphere inside the CNN studio was electric with anticipation. The panel discussion on politics in Hollywood, influence or interference, was slated to be a fiery one, and it did not disappoint. For weeks, the network had promoted this debate, hyping it as the next cultural battlefield. The panel was a diverse lineup of media analysts, actors, and political commentators, each known for their outspoken views on the increasingly blurred line between entertainment and ideology. But the real spark was expected from two names in particular, Jessica Tarlov and Clint Eastwood. Jessica Tarlov, a regular political analyst on Fox News, had built her reputation as a tenacious liberal voice who never shied away from challenging conservative icons. Known for her incisive, no-holds-barred commentary, she had become a lightning rod for controversy, especially when she locked horns with conservative figures on live television. Clint Eastwood, on the other hand, was a living legend. A filmmaker and actor whose career spanned more than 6 decades, Eastwood was a symbol of a certain old-school Americana, gritty, rugged, unapologetically masculine. By the time the sun dipped below the Pacific, Jessica Tarlov's bold takedown of Clint Eastwood had already gone viral. Clips of her sharp commentary were flooding X, formerly Twitter, TikTok, and YouTube, each one captioned with some variation of Tarlov versus Eastwood, Hollywood's new civil war. Cable news pundits were already debating her remarks, and fan bases were choosing sides. Some applauded her for calling out what they saw as outdated ideals. Others, however, were waiting, wondering if Clint Eastwood, the icon of silent defiance, would respond. He didn't wait long. Later that evening, Eastwood made a scheduled appearance on a separate program, a quieter, more intimate interview on a well-respected talk show known for long-form conversations rather than fiery debates. There was no live audience, no panel of opposing voices. Just Clint, seated in a leather armchair across from the host, sipping coffee from a modest white mug, calm as ever. The host, clearly aware of the media firestorm, smiled carefully. Clint, he said, leaning forward, you've been trending all day, though not for any movie. Jessica Tarlov made some pretty strong remarks about you on CNN earlier. Called you part of the problem, representing toxic masculinity and an outdated version of Hollywood. Do you care to respond? Clint didn't flinch. He looked down his cup, gave a small, almost amused chuckle, and then looked up with that familiar steely gaze, half warmth, half granite. The kind of look that said, I've seen more than you know, and I'm not rattled by any of this. I've been making movies for over 60 years, he said, his voice low and even. And I never needed to scream over anyone to get my point across. If standing up for timeless values like strength, courage, and independence makes me outdated, then so be it. He paused, letting the words settle. At least I'm not chasing every trend just to stay liked. The room went quiet. No dramatic music. No quick cuts or overproduced graphics. Just silence and the unmistakable chill of precision-cut truth. He leaned back slightly in his chair, his body language that a man who had nothing to prove and no desire to posture. You know, he added, Hollywood used to be about storytelling. You sat in a dark theater, and for 2 hours, you were pulled into someone else's world. A story, a character, a struggle. Now it's about pleasing Twitter. Every script reads like it was written by a committee afraid of offending 5 hashtags. The host raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the bluntness, but not the tone. That's what made Clint's words cut so deep. He wasn't angry. He wasn't lashing out. He was just telling the truth as he saw it. If that progress, he said, his voice still calm, I'll pass. It was vintage Eastwood. Short sentences, long silences, and surgical delivery. There was no name calling. No need for viral rants. Just a subtle, devastating rebuttal delivered with the kind of gravitas that only comes from someone who's been through the cultural wars before and survived. Social media lit up again, but this time it was a different kind of buzz. Even those who didn't agree with his politics had to admit, Clint Eastwood had just delivered one of the most composed and cutting responses in recent memory. Some praised him as a statesman of a dying era. Others accused him of being out of touch, clinging to an outdated Hollywood mythos. But no one could say he didn't command a moment. Within hours, the clips of his response were being shared under hashtags like hashtag Eastwood Unbothered and hashtag Clint Crushes Back. One viral post read, Jessica Tarlov threw a punch. Clint Eastwood gave her a masterclass in composure. But the deeper resonance of his words went beyond the celebrity drama. Eastwood's response touched on something that had been simmering in the background of Hollywood discourse for years. The shift from art to activism, from story to statement. There had been a growing unease among many in the industry, writers, directors, and even actors, who felt like storytelling had become secondary to messaging. Studios were more concerned with social media backlash than narrative integrity. Film festivals seemed more interested in political alignment than creative excellence. And in that climate, Eastwood's words weren't just a clapback. They were a diagnosis. He continued in the interview, elaborating on his concerns without naming names or engaging in character assassination. Look, he said, I'm not saying we shouldn't talk about real issues. God knows I've tackled plenty of tough subjects in my films. But when the story becomes a sermon, you lose the audience. You gotta let people feel things, not force them to think a certain way. The host nodded, clearly intrigued. So you're saying politics doesn't belong in film? No, Clint said quickly, I'm saying it doesn't belong on top of film. A good story can include politics, sure. But when politics replace the story, you're not making art. You're making propaganda. That line hit hard. It was quoted by columnists, retweeted by industry veterans, and debated on podcasts within hours. His critics pounced, calling it an oversimplification. His defenders praised it as the most honest commentary to come from a Hollywood insider in years. Meanwhile, Jessica Tarlov, for her part, maintained her position. She took to social media later that night, tweeting, I respect Clint Eastwood's legacy. But we can't pretend the old norms he celebrates haven't excluded or marginalized a lot of voices. Hollywood can do better, and should. It was a measured response, but the contrast in tone between her fiery accusation and Eastwood's composed comeback only fueled the media frenzy further. Talk shows began framing the debate as more than just a clash of personalities. It was a generational standoff, a war over what Hollywood was, is, and should be. Eastwood, though, had said his piece. He didn't return to the fray. He didn't tweet. He didn't issue a follow-up statement. He simply went back to his work, quietly, intentionally like always. But the impact of his words lingered. In studios, writers' rooms, and executive meetings across Los Angeles, people were talking. Some privately agreed with Eastwood, but didn't dare say so out loud. Others doubled down on the need for cultural sensitivity in entertainment. But no one, on either side, could deny that something about his delivery had pierced through the noise. Clint Eastwood hadn't just defended himself. He called out a fundamental identity crisis within Hollywood itself. And he'd done it with the calm confidence of a man who, for better or worse, had nothing left to prove. The clash was far from over. But for now, the last word belonged to Eastwood. In the days that followed, Eastwood's words rippled far beyond the entertainment world. Op-eds appeared in The Hollywood Reporter and Variety, with some praising his composure and clarity, while others dissected his comments as tone-deaf and dismissive of evolving social norms. Film students debated the moment in classrooms. Late-night hosts referenced it in monologues. Even political figures subtly weighed in. One senator tweeting, "We could use more Clint Eastwoods and fewer Twitter warriors." What struck many wasn't just what Clint Eastwood said. It was how he said it. In an age of outrage and instant rebuttals, his restraint was disarming. He didn't try to trend. He simply told the truth as he saw it, then stepped back and let the storm swirl without him.